Hey, you random stranger, welcome back. We are up to episodes 9 and 10 of Madoka, and we're really getting into the thick of things now. You know what's interesting is that we are watching a deconstruction of sorts of the magical girl genre, but it also feels like a lot more than that. It's this very unflinching look at what happens when our desire to help people gets weaponized against us and against the very people that we are trying to help. It's also about how systems, if designed in a certain way, can exploit even the beautiful parts of human nature and the mechanisms by which they perpetuate cycles of violence and trauma. So yeah, it's extremely relatable in ways that, I don't know, sometimes is uncomfortable to think about, but I guess that's what makes it a really good show. The most obvious illustration, of course, of how a system can cause harm was Sayaka's breakdown and her turning into a witch. Watching her downward spiral gave me chills because of how relatable a lot of it was. We may not live in a world with witches and magical girls, but we do live in one where monsters exist in human form and also in systemic form, and sometimes inside of our own heads. First off, Sayaka had to deal with the fact that bloody Qubey had essentially tricked her into becoming something not quite human. And it was even more tragic because the only reason why Sayaka became a magical girl in the first place was because of Mummy, who never really thought to ask questions about what transforming into a magical girl actually meant, which means she also didn't ask questions about how witches come into existence. It was why Mummy was able to maintain her very idealistic, heroic perception of magical girls that she then passed on to Sayaka, and just remain blissfully unaware of the horrifying reality that she had given up on her own humanity and that she was actually killing other girls who used to be just like her. Sayaka being Sayaka, she really did try to push through it. She continued for a time at least striving to be this perfect, selfless hero, but reality quickly got in the way of that when Hitomi laid down the gauntlet regarding Kyosuke. A moment that really exposed Sayaka's core problem or issue was when Hitomi asked her, "Can you accept your true feelings?" She was talking about Kyosuke, but it also cut to the heart of everything else because Sayaka built her identity around being selfless, but she was never fully honest about what drove her decision to become a magical girl. She couldn't bring herself to admit that, she wanted Kyosuke for herself, nor could she accept the fact that her wish to heal him was driven at least partly by her desire for his attention and for his love. Her perfectionism made her so afraid of having anything less than pure motivations that she would rather deny and then suppress her own true feelings than accept her own humanity, which is why she was so horrified when she caught herself, even for a second, regretting that she had ever saved Hitomi. Instead of accepting that having mixed feelings is normal, we're all humans, we all get these stray thoughts that aren't so pure every now and then, but she saw it as proof that she had failed as a magical girl who fights only for justice and never ever for personal gain. It's that perfectionist mindset that a lot of us, me included, fall into, where one bad thought or one failure suddenly makes you a terrible person, and we end up carrying that guilt and punishing ourselves over and over for a moment of human weakness that we all understandably have. It really also didn't help that Sayaka couldn't imagine Kyosuke ever loving someone who is essentially an animated corpse. So when reality didn't quite match Sayaka's completely unrealistic idea of what a hero should be and what kind of hero she was, she didn't dial back her expectations, but she kind of just broke under them. And we saw that in her fight with the witch, where she was just hacking away at it in this completely unhinged manner. And she also kept letting herself get stabbed over and over in a way that felt like she was deliberately using the pain as a twisted form of self-punishment. Like Dave Asher commented, Sayaka wasn't just detaching herself from physical pain, but mentally detaching herself from her ideals and her feelings altogether. And I agree that the emotional detachment was what sped up her transformation into a witch, because once you stop seeing any point to your own existence, why not just give yourself over to reckless violence and pain and eventually despair? During the fight, there was also this huge mirror behind that was shattering, I guess symbolizing the shattering of her own heroic self-image. And there was also what looked like a hero's cape falling to the ground along with all that broken glass, and also that red sun-shaped kind of pillar thing, like a crown or a religious symbol, which kind of looked like it was being held out by this Christ-like figure. It could represent how Sayaka used to see herself, like as this savior figure who sacrificed herself for others. But in this very moment, that idea was being just torn apart, not only because she'd given up on seeing herself as a proper hero, but she was also rejecting the very concept that suffering for others has any meaning at all. And then there were these music notes, you know, the same ones that used to symbolize her love and sacrifice for Kyosuke. And they looked like they were healing her physical wounds, but there was something quite hollow and twisted about the fact that they were healing someone who is already emotionally dead inside. Also, if you look closely, they're not even real music notes. They're just things that kind of look like them. They have almost like an appearance of corrupted sheet music, which is appropriate given the fact that magical girls literally corrupt themselves every time that they use their powers. It also felt like this visual representation of how Sayaka had started to see herself, not as a genuine magical girl, but as a kind of fraud, or like, you know, as she said, just a rock, you know, who's just going through the motions of what a hero should look like without actually being a real one. When Sayaka said, "There's no way I can lose now," it was so sad because it wasn't confidence, but this terrible realization that she can't lose anything when she's already lost everything that matters. So later, when she turned back to Kyouko, like, I don't know, some kind of broken doll would in horror movies, Sayaka the hero was well and truly dead by then. The scene where Sayaka just lost it on Madoka also showed just how far she'd fallen. Madoka was trying to remind her that she's still human, she's still worth caring about, but Sayaka kind of snapped and was like, if you care, why don't you help me fight witches then, if it's so easy for you? It was obvious that it wasn't really about what Madoka should or shouldn't do. It was Sayaka just drowning in her own self-hatred and lashing out at someone who is around and who still cares. I think it's just that cruel thing that we do sometimes when we are at our lowest point. We can push away the people who love us most, almost like we're testing whether even they will give up on us too. So even though Sayaka really didn't mean what she said, I think it'll definitely weigh on Madoka and just kind of eat at her and be a huge part of why she will eventually make the decision to become a magical girl to just fix everything. The train scene. So yeah, that was the final straw. You know, I was icked out, but not entirely shocked when Kenneth Elder and a couple of others said that it was a conversation that the writer, Nobuchi, had overheard on a train one night, and he kind of just wrote it into the script. So after sacrificing everything, Sayaka was confronted with how awful humans can be. Was it really worth becoming a glorified zombie just for the sake of people like this? A few others in the comments confirmed that it is pretty much canon that Sayaka did go on to kill those men, which would have been the ultimate betrayal of everything that she had said she stood for. She had become a magical girl to save people, but then had murdered the very people that she was supposed to protect, you know, and it shouldn't have mattered that they were shitty human beings. Her whole image was built around being better than that, around not harming anyone. So ultimately, it was her high-minded ideals that became a prison, and a permanent one at that. Like, she couldn't accept that healing Kyosuke wasn't 100% altruistic. She couldn't accept how some people are just like the dirt on the bottom of our shoes and aren't worth saving. And she also couldn't deal with how being human means having complex, sometimes contradictory feelings. Her perfectionism made her super brittle. And when she finally cracked, she broke like completely. Ironically, and like this show has just a way of making our hearts clench really tight. I did feel that the moment Sayaka transformed into a witch was also when she was at her most human. She finally took off the mask of a perfect, strong hero and let herself feel the full weight of her pain and her regret. For once, she was completely honest about how good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes. It was exactly in that moment of raw humanity when the system destroyed her and turned her into a witch. It was kind of like watching someone take their last breath of real, honest air before succumbing to the darkness. I mean, her last teardrop, her last human teardrop, was literally what triggered her transformation into a witch. There was a ton of symbolic imagery in the split second of Sayaka's transformation. So there was that row of violinists and Sayaka watching them in kind of awe and some kind of pendant around her neck. The weird music notes became even more distorted and then they kind of just faded away. And then there was also another mirror cracking, like the one that had shattered in her fight with the witch, but this time it was the background to Sayaka's silhouette being like torn apart or split. And it also reminded me actually of when Madoka was in that witch's labyrinth and she was being just torn apart. It was like her very soul was rendered or fractured along with her broken worldview and whatever hope that she'd had left. The final shot was like a witch labyrinth style impressionistic drawing of Sayaka drowning underwater, and then the seaweed or whatever it was kind of morphed into the shape of Sayaka. So there was this monstrous version of who she used to be. The drowning metaphor was apt, like Sayaka effectively drowned in her own despair, just pulled under by the weight of everything that she couldn't save or fix or accept. And even though she'd become this monstrous thing, it was still unmistakably Sayaka beneath it all. And that also tracks with other witch labyrinths that we've seen, where the witch is born from everything that the former magical girl used to be. Their hopes and their dreams and their core essence get twisted into the evil that they once fought against. It's that classic Nietzsche warning played out. You know, another philosopher whose ideas feature heavily in Madoka Magica, sometimes explicitly but often symbolically. He who fights monsters should be careful lest he thereby also become a monster. Basically, the danger for people who fight against evil or who even just contemplate the darker aspects of human nature is getting corrupted by that darkness and losing their own moral compass or even themselves in the process. For Sayaka, she was battling witches, but she was also wrestling with these deep philosophical questions that tore at her core beliefs around who she thought she was. What does it mean to be human? What is the point of sacrifice if no one appreciates it, or if the people you're sacrificing for aren't even worth it? So her internal struggle with those darker truths about humanity and her own sense of worth ate away at her until all that was left was pain and self-hatred, which is essentially what a witch is. It's just this black hole of pure despair. I'll cap off this very long and sad session about Sayaka with what I thought was a very insightful comment from Low Poly Burger, who wrote, "One thing that makes Qubey so uncomfortable for me is that he has so many similarities with people or industries that specifically target young girls, often at their most vulnerable and emotional, with promises of getting what they want. Sayaka breaking down in Madoka's arms before her fight has parallels with how many victims feel after realizing what happened to them, saying that Kyosuke could never love someone like her, someone who had her body permanently altered into being something below human. Even the conversation between those two men in the train adds to the themes of girls often being used and then thrown away with no real sympathy. I don't know if it was intentional, but it's an interesting and uncomfortable angle the show makes." Thank you for bringing that to the fore. It did make me think back to the years I spent working at a global anti-trafficking organization, which had a specific focus on rescuing young people, often girls, from sexual exploitation and rehabilitating them, but also like reforming how legal systems respond to cases of human trafficking and how effectively they prosecute perpetrators. And your comment made me think of two specific aspects about exploitation in the real world that mirrors how exploitation seems to work in Madoka. One is what you pointed out about how victims feel. The way that Sayaka felt devalued and unworthy of love also mirrors how young people are very often tricked into an exploitative situation, often with false promises of, say, good employment that they then can't get out of. And once they're victimized, they feel intense shame and guilt, even though they were the ones who were preyed on. And then that can lead to feelings of isolation and other like self-destructive behaviors. The second thing is that the more and the more effectively you prosecute and punish perpetrators, the less prevalent the crime over time, particularly for crimes like child sexual exploitation. Conversely, the less responsive a justice system, the more rampant the crime, which kind of just makes intuitive sense, but it was just wild, like how long it would take. And we're talking years for even like a small positive change to be made so that victims were treated better by the justice system due to either like ignorance or indifference. And I think those are the same reasons why Qubey in this show has been able to continuously exploit girls. It's because magical girls, remember, were made to be forgotten. There's no one holding Qubey to account because most people don't even know that this world exists. So yes, Madoka does raise these very uncomfortable truths about the nature of our world and of humanity once you start drawing those parallels. Kind of just like our own world, what makes this system particularly insidious is how it targets young girls who are more likely to make these naive wishes and then are more likely to break when the world doesn't work the way that they thought it did. Something new we can add to our catalogue of all the things that makes Qubey horrible is when they show that they can inflict pain on magical girls just by touching their soul gems, the implications of which are wild, not in the least that Qubey seems to be able to, in certain situations, exert complete mental control over the girls. I suppose they do need to be able to physically get at their soul gems, but it did hint strongly, again, at a very twisted power dynamic. But of course, Qubey operates on a completely different alien morality that doesn't understand why humans would have a problem with that sort of arrangement. It was also interesting the way that Homura said that normally a miracle costs far more than a human life, but that is the price that Qubey sells them for. Like Qubey is this super shady discount dealer just giving away miracles for the low, low price of just your soul and your humanity. Like, what a bargain. Again, it's how Qubey frames this deal as if they're doing the girls a favor when really it is the worst kind of predatory contract, which links in neatly to when Homura called Qubey the Incubator. So incubators, they're systems that nurture something until it's ready to hatch and then get farmed and consumed. So if you take that kind of like farming analogy, Qubey is planting magical girls with the soil being their own despair, and just kind of waiting for them to mature into witches. It was also really cool to learn from you guys that the incubating or like that farming analogy is reflected in word puns as well. Greblin explained how when Qubey was talking about like how it's natural that magical girls should turn into witches, it's because the Japanese for witch is majo, whose kanji characters spell out like literally magic woman or demon woman. And that phrase is contained in the term for magical girls, which is maho shoujo. So you take that first word and the last word, and then you get majo, which is witch. It's crazy because it's so simple, but it's also not something that immediately hits you, especially if you're not familiar with Japanese kanji. Kuroneka also pointed out some other really like wild word punny hints, like how Qubey is literally in the word Incubator, which blew my mind. Also in English, if you take the acronym for grief seed, which is GS, and you flip that around to SG, that makes soul gem. So the terms themselves mirror each other, just like magical girls mirror or like turn into witches. It's so cool. I loved learning all that. Like the way that the system exploits girls was staring at us in the face this whole time with those very specific word choices. Let's talk about Kyouko. So Kyoko's backstory explained a lot about her character, and it was about as tragic as we expected. She was once, like Sayaka, a kid who just wanted to help people, including her dad, who was socially outcast for his religious views and actions. She made a wish for people to listen to her dad, which backfired when he realized that his congregation was only sitting in the pews because they had been brainwashed, which led him to start drinking and then losing his grip on reality and eventually committing a murder-suicide that destroyed her entire family. I thought it was a great choice to tell Kyoko's backstory through these very simple, childish paddle pop stick figures. And generally, when you think back to the Witch's Labyrinths, they too are kind of portrayed through these simplistic kind of images, really highlighting that these are kids who have been through trauma. Just like how Kyouko was literally a child when she had to deal with very adult problems like poverty and religious persecution and just family trauma. I did think it remarkable that Kyouko doesn't seem to resent her dad, even though he called her a witch and then went on to murder her family. There was this kind of compassion in how she told the story, like she understands that he had a well-intentioned dream of being a spiritual guide and of helping people that just didn't work out in the way that he wanted to. And then she blamed herself for it. It did make me love Kyouko even more because she shows real emotional maturity for someone who was basically failed by the adult who was supposed to protect her and whose ego and obsession with being a savior was to blame as well. The fact that Kyouko believed that her dad's sermons could help people like get rid of their depression and their inner demons while she fought the actual witches that preyed on people's despair, again highlights why Qubey goes for young girls. You know, it was this very innocent idea of tackling the world's problems through teamwork. Unfortunately, that is not how reality works. You know, no amount of listening to even the most charismatic preacher will cure someone of their mental health issues or resolve their deep-seated problems that cause them in the first place. Change really has to come from within, and too often, or almost always, the nature of suffering is very complex and often systemic. And that's something that when you're at that age, you still don't really have a full grasp on, hence why these girls make such good victims for Qubey. Just like Sayaka's simplistic view of heroism, Kyoko's naive understanding of how to fix people was doomed to fail, which is why her advice to Sayaka, which basically was like, live only for yourself because trying to save other people only leads to disappointment and tragedy, it sounds selfish, but it's wisdom born from real life experience. Kyouko learned the hard way that you cannot control how your good intentions play out in this world. The symbolism of the apples and her just munching away at them was perfect too. The contrast between the withered apples when she was retelling the story of her impoverished childhood versus the huge bag of apples that she was snacking on as she talked to Sayaka, I think visually represented how becoming a magical girl has paid off materially in certain ways for Kyouko, but it did cost her everything that actually mattered. The fact that the apples were stolen also reflects her current philosophy. You know, take what you can and don't worry about the right or wrong of it because the world sure isn't going to treat you fairly. There's also something biblical about the image of biting into an apple, a stolen apple. Like traditionally, it's the forbidden fruit that gave the first humans knowledge at the cost of their innocence. Likewise, Kyouko gained the knowledge of how cruel the world really is, but she lost her innocence and her family in the process and had to go through a lot of suffering. Every time she took an angry bite into an apple, it felt like she was reminding herself of that, convincing herself that she's not wrong for looking out for herself first, because look what happened when she tried to do the opposite of that. When Sayaka judged Kyouko for stealing those apples, though, it was this clash between someone who still believed in moral absolutes versus someone who's learned that sometimes survival means bending some rules and compromising your ideals. At the same time, I think part of Kyouko will always be that girl who genuinely cares and who genuinely wants to help people, which is why she went from wanting to kill Sayaka to wanting to save her, because she saw herself in Sayaka, saw the same naive idealism that destroyed her. There's also another possible layer to why Kyouko really connected with Sayaka, and I think it's because there is this eerie similarity between Sayaka and Kyoko's dad. Both had a desire to help people, but also had a very deep-seated need or desperation to be recognized as a savior. So when Kyouko and Sayaka were talking, the image in the stained glass window behind them looked like, I don't know, like an angel stabbing something. And that's how Sayaka saw herself. This guardian angel watching over a world that she's been charged to protect and fighting against evil. Maybe Kyoko's dad didn't just go mad because he found out people only followed him because of her magic, but also because he was ashamed of how he wanted his own charisma to be the reason. He wasn't this pure, selfless preacher who just wanted to lead people to God. Just like how Sayaka couldn't handle it when her thoughts and her behavior didn't match her image of a purely selfless hero. I also think the fact that they were in this broken, rundown church with these fragile stained glass windows was not just setting up for Kyoko's backstory, but also setting up for when Sayaka's image was shattered, represented by the visual, literal shattering of glass in her final transformation into a witch. Even after Sayaka rejected her help, Kyouko followed her to make sure that she didn't die. I think that's the contradiction with Kyouko. She preaches a live only for yourself kind of philosophy, but at the same time can't stop herself from caring. So I think her philosophy is as much about protecting herself from caring too much as it is about surviving. Okay, so we've figured out that there's an entire system designed around magical girls hunting witches for grief seeds, not realizing that they're actually consuming the remains of girls who were once like them. But Kyoko's principle of balance underpins one reason why this cannibalistic cycle continues. So she said, if you wish for hope, an equal amount of despair is scattered across the world. This thinking directly echoes Arthur Schopenhauer, another philosopher that we've mentioned in the past when we talked about Faust and how humans are condemned to constantly strive for things. Schopenhauer understood existence as being governed by an equilibrium between two opposing forces. He wrote, all satisfaction, or what is commonly called happiness, is really and essentially always negative only and never positive. Meaning what we call happiness is just the temporary absence of pain or want or suffering. It's not really a thing on its own. So for example, when we eat, we don't gain happiness so much as eliminate hunger. Or when we achieve a goal, satisfaction comes from ending the anxiety of striving for that goal and not from some inherent pleasure. This creates what Schopenhauer saw as life's fundamental pattern or condition. It's like this pendulum that swings between suffering and boredom. So when we're not actively suffering or in pain, we're restlessly searching for meaning and just always trapped in a constant cycle of wanting and striving and then getting what we want, but always being either disappointed or having a very short-lived sort of satisfaction. The magical girl system traps its victims in this pendulum swing that Schopenhauer described. When a girl makes a wish, she essentially creates a debt that she eventually has to pay. Every time a magical girl consumes a grief seed, all she's doing really is consuming another girl's despair to postpone her own transformation into a witch, swinging temporarily away from suffering, only to slowly accumulate the weight that will eventually swing her back. The weight that swings them back to pain and despair really is just generated through the daily reality of being a magical girl. They always have moments of trauma and suffering. They watch their friends die. They struggle with loneliness and guilt and the corruption of their soul gems and the meaninglessness eventually of what they're doing. They alternate between these very brief periods of triumph that end up being quite hollow because winning over witches doesn't actually end this cycle. Given all this, the best a magical girl can do is to minimize her suffering, rather than chase the illusion of happiness or chase the illusion of actually accomplishing some kind of justice in the world, which is basically Kyoko's philosophy in a nutshell. You cannot stop this pendulum from swinging, so you may as well learn to ride it out without being destroyed by it or being overwhelmed by how meaningless it is. We saw more evidence of Homura's ability to manipulate time. The way that she just shot up Qubey with a pistol and all of the bullets mysteriously hit at the same time, which is something that I'd missed the first time watching. So thank you, Ragashingo, for pointing that out. Plus, there's also that time grenade that I assume she uses to reset everything. I was trying to put myself in Homura's shoes, and I think her emotional outburst of frustration with Madoka suggests that no matter what timeline she's been in, the same depressing pattern plays out. Madoka makes a contract, becomes a magical girl, and then dies and gets consumed by the system. Each time Homura fails to save Madoka, she is forced to confront the awful reality that maybe some kinds of suffering just cannot be avoided. She is also trapped in her own version of Schopenhauer's pendulum. She oscillates between the agony of watching Madoka sacrifice herself over and over and across multiple timelines, and then the exhaustion of having to reset and start over, only to face the same outcome every time. Each reset never really brings actual peace or resolution, hence her feeling dead on the inside. But like Kyouko, her inability to stop caring for Madoka causes Homura to keep desperately fighting anyway. I'd say Homura's love for Madoka is so consuming that it borders on ruthless. Everything she does is calculated around the one obsessive goal, which is to stop Madoka from making the contract with Qubey. When she helped Sayaka, it wasn't about Sayaka at all. It was about stopping Madoka from feeling guilty enough to make that fatal choice. Obviously, because Homura was willing to kill Sayaka if necessary. What's sad is that on the flip side, Madoka has no memory of their previous engagements. To her, Homura is this mysterious, really odd girl who is very fixated on her for some reason. Meanwhile, Homura is just fighting this very intensely lonely war where she is the only one who remembers what they mean or what they meant to each other. It's like the 51st Dates trope where one person gets amnesia and then the other person has to fight for them over and over again. Madoka's innate power has been hinted at for forever at this point, but we did get a new angle on it when Qubey flagged the possibility of her becoming, quote, an all-powerful god. So this isn't just about raw magical power, it's about changing the fundamental laws of the universe itself, including of the magical girl world. In certain religions or belief systems, gods sacrifice themselves to save humanity from their sin or their certain doom. This whole conversation hinted at how if Madoka does become a magical girl, it will likely be not just for the purpose of saving Sayaka, but of breaking the system's exploitative cycle, and at the cost of something that will cost her far greater than her own life. As you mentioned before, what's making Madoka even consider that as a possibility is her guilt. She feels responsible for Sayaka's fate because she stayed on the sidelines. It's that guilt that we feel when we can't save someone that we care about, that feeling that if we just done something differently, maybe things would have turned out better for them, or that they'd still be alive. Overall, the show asks the question, what would happen if you gave incredible power to a bunch of traumatized teenagers and burdened them with fighting an unwinnable war? And the answer, obviously, is tragedy on a cosmic scale. Okay, guys, episode 9 of Madoka Magica in 3, 2, 1, play. Oh, we're getting more images from a transformation. Just angry orchestral music. And Kyoko. Kyoko still wants to save her. Da, 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 da. That's an angry use of the Phrygian scale. Oh, the train tracks. So she freezes time. Okay. Okay. Yep. Kyoko's still just learning things that Qubey never bothered to tell her. I yeah, I think Sayaka's gone. Like, I don't know to what extent the transformation into a witch is reversible unless really we're just waiting on Madoka to become that god that can rewrite the laws of the universe. And then maybe then every magical girl who ever turned into a witch might have a chance. Maybe Madoka has to work with Homura to go back in time far enough so that they could stop this whole system from unraveling in the first place. It is interesting to compare Sayaka and Madoka in the sense that Sayaka really wanted to be that savior of the world, I guess, or if not of the world, then at least of the people that she could save, but failed because of completely human imperfections that she couldn't get over. Whereas Madoka is being presented as the perfect savior, but is, unlike Sayaka, really hesitant to take that step and doesn't think that she can do it, which is probably ironically exactly the reason why she can. Yeah, so basically Madoka is like Jesus. Major. That's the oncoming train. Oh, doesn't matter. It's just, it's happened so many times. She's just so dead on the inside. Oh my god. We're up to like the stage of corpse disposal. Homina's not wrong. I mean, look, this situation does require and demand loads of compassion, but I think Homura has just been squeezed completely dry. No. How it's like standing with a bunch of other stuffed toys. Okay, let's see how Qubey explains. Oh, It's to stop the universe from eventually spinning, running itself down. The royal we is like rebellious spirits. All those chairs for. That's quite an ingenious way to use how the more we grow and experience life, the more rich our emotional lives. Okay, so there is some grand plan. I mean, I'm a bit scared because, that does actually make sense in the grand scheme of things. That I vehemently disagree with because you cannot have consent if it's not informed consent. But clearly, like Qubey doesn't operate on normal human understandings and modern understandings of legal consent. So it's kind of a moot point anyway. Yeah, exactly. I mean, just let me know. Call me, maybe. If it's informed consent and the girls go into this knowing what they're signing up to, I think that would be better. If not, okay, still. I do wonder why they still talk to Qubey. So I guess in The human world Sayaka just goes on like a missing persons list, and her parents just grieve for the rest of their lives. Kyoko's like, your best friend died. You need to feel something. Mm. Yeah, that sounds like Kyoko. She's so good. just it's just a theory that has no basis, but it's still worth trying, right? It's very Tolkien of Kyoko. People want to believe in the triumph of good over evil, even in the face of like, um, really bad odds. I love these two teaming up. Stealing it with a snack. That's so great. It's like she's sharing her stash. Where it's like the under a bridge pass or something. Yeah, I mean, I guess they have nothing to lose. Well, I mean, they could die, but I guess it's worth it. Okay, so there are like traces of, I don't know, wave patterns that identify different witches. Love me. No. It's just like I'm used to this already. I'm used to going into life-threatening situations with no capacity to defend myself. Hmm. She makes the most sense. She's like, just live a happy life, a simple life, if you can. Mm. Uh, she just wants her everyone what was taken from her. It's like in a concert hall. Uh, they got to face a full-on orchestra and a mad composer. Mm. Hey, there's her sword. Ah, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful violin solo. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Yeah. Oh, this music just like intensifies everything like a hundredfold. What's with all the rolling wheels? That ooh, that was interesting. How the forms of Sayaka and Kyouko were kind of just intertwined with each other. Oh, and the shattering mirror pieces as well are still there. It's still like the imagery of that circle that's like imprisoning other circles. Mm. Oh my god, that's Kyosuke. Or Sayaka Justin composes. What? What is she doing? Is she self-destructing? Is she joining her and becoming one giant witch? What? She destroyed her own soul gem. That's what happened, right? She threw her soul gem out and then blasted it. And then. Hmm. Oh, they send the Walpurgisnacht so that Madoka has to make the choice to become a magical girl. And then eventually that provides them with the biggest power charge ever when she gets overwhelmed. This is different. I feel like. Look, I don't know if there's a canon interpretation of what exactly happened when Sayaka sacrificed herself, when her soul literally, to blow all of them up, or both herself and Sayaka, or Sayaka the witch up. Is this Kyouko, the voice actor for Kyouko, singing this? Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if Kyoko herself took on the form of a witch, but along with Sayaka so that Sayaka wouldn't be alone. Or if she was like, it's better if I end your existence so you don't have to keep suffering as a witch. But in order to end Sayaka in that form, she had to use her own soul gem to cause the explosion. I'm gonna miss Kyoko. If that was the last time that we ever saw her, I am definitely gonna miss her. Her development through, what was it, 5 episodes? Or maybe even less, four or five episodes was brilliant. They really set her character up as this very complex, multi-onion layered character. Every single episode they peel back another layer and then another layer and then another layer to reveal her true, I guess, basically explain why she is the way that she is and what she values most and most wants to see in the world, which turned out to be the most wholesome thing ever, which was for anyone who can to just live a happy life full of love. Out of all the magical girls, I definitely relate the most to Kyoko in her worldview of things. The way that she was very clear eyed in the risk that they were taking by attempting to call Sayaka back from her witch form. No idea if that would work. Probably knew that she was going to die in the process, and yet she went ahead and did it anyway. She didn't go into it blind to the risk, but she went into it anyway because to her, it is infinitely better to attempt to create the good that you want to see in the world than to not attempt anything at all. The other person is Homura. So when Homura froze time to get Kyoko out of Sayaka's witch labyrinth, she said things like, oh, you're just a burden to me now, or like, well, do you want to drop this piece of dead meat so that we can fight together and just kill this witch now? Meaning Sayaka's body. And it sounded so cold-blooded, which Kyoko not wrongfully pointed out, but I think Homura's actions speak louder and reveal her underlying care and concern for the people that she is helping, or at least her care and concern for Madoka. Because I think she was willing to help Kyouko get Sayaka's body out of there because she knew that that's what Madoka would have wanted. So Homura may not have the capacity to give off warmth and encouragement and like, positive vibes like Kyouko. But I think that is also largely because of all of the trauma and all of the disappointment that she's been through already. So all she can do is do whatever she can to keep Madoka from suffering, even if she cannot offer words to assure Madoka that things are going to get better, because in her heart, she knows that they probably won't. On Qubey explaining why they set up an incubation system to turn magical girls into witches, the reason being for energy purposes, which is sort of what we already knew, and to reverse the effects of entropy, which was a new perspective, I guess. Look, it made complete logical and moral sense. It even had this transcendent, noble sense of doing right by everyone in the universe. It's that classic conundrum of sacrificing the few for the good of the many. I mean, even the human race would benefit from harvesting this energy in order to secure another planet in the distant future when Earth's resources inevitably deplete. So, assuming there are no other alternatives to producing this sort of energy, and that is a huge assumption, and to me has always been a critical weakness in a lot of utilitarian solutions. The logic is sound, even if Qubey doesn't understand how morally unjust it is from a human perspective. So really, this isn't an issue of logic, it's an issue of relative morality. If you see intrinsic value in a single human life, then of course Qubey is a monster and you would be right to call them so. But if you see the sum total of what will happen, say trillions of years down the line when the universe reaches maximum entropy and then enters into a heat death spiral, and you value the continued existence of all the species in the universe, then Qubey has a point. Yeah, I'd be really curious to sort of take the temperature of everyone's opinions, because I think you could have any number of defensible moral positions depending on your starting moral standpoint. All right, I reckon we should just dive into episode 10. Here we go in 3, 2, 1, play. A different timeline. The first timeline? Oh. Oh, oh my, what if we get like a whole run through of like the 50 billion times that she's already done this? I would love it. I need to know, how does a girl like this turn into the Homura that we have been seeing this whole time? I'm sorry, because it's so funny because this did happen the first time that we met Homura, except she made Madoka take her to the medical office. Maybe there's a set number of events that Homura has to make happen to ensure she has a chance to save Madoka. Because she doesn't have many friends. Oh, is it? Oh, oh gosh, math is like my worst subject. I love how they're going through all of the things that happened the first day in our timeline. And she just kind of did that equation like nothing. Basically, the complete opposite of the Homura that we have been seeing. That sounds very much like Madoka, doesn't it? This is her pre turning into a magical girl. What does that say? Like, hell. She's like walked into a witch's labyrinth without even knowing. It's mommy. That music. Oh my god. I was accepting mommy, just not Madoka. Or yeah. They got me good. I mean, this is a timeline where mummy's not alone. It did seem like the Madoka in this timeline was way more confident and outgoing. Must have been the confidence she got from becoming a magical and therefore, quote unquote, becoming useful. Oh, whoa. Okay, that's the dream that we started with. Wait, Homura's the girl who never made the choice to become a magical girl. It's kind of like a weird role reversal. Wow, no regrets. Like what Sayaka wanted or said that she had, but really she did. Also, has the city already been destroyed by the Walpurgisnacht? I mean, it looks pretty in ruins. just how did she word her wish to make it so that her power became time manipulation? Did Homura play Qubey or create some sort of loophole without Qubey even noticing? Also, doesn't Qubey just use the energy that they've stored from like witches, like from magical girls becoming witches, and then uses that same energy to turn other girls into magical girls? Wait, we did have a witch at the hospital. Whoa, she's freezing it there so she can hit it over and over multiple times in that single instant. She ruined that golf club. It's like learning how to load a pistol. Oh, can't quite read that. What? Just falling torsos. Schoolgirl torsos. Maybe this is someone who really loved doing the washing, you know? Oh, it was a detonator. Okay. Mommy's hair nest. Oh, it's the whole equal and opposite reaction, right? Because if Madoka ever became a witch herself, because she was so good, it has to be like an equal, massive amount of evil that takes her place. In any timeline, Sayaka is always at loggerheads with Homura. How is she fitting all of those things in her clothes without setting it off accidentally? Oh. She's done it every which way. Oh. Oh. Oh my god. Ugh. It's like Lord of the Flies. I can't believe Madoka actually did that though to Mummy. Like immediately, it seemed. And Madoka's like, no. Do it again. Have we heard Homura call? Oh god, she's had to kill her a lot of times, hey? Have we heard Homura call Madoka by her first name in our own timeline, like the timeline we started with? Man, what an existence. A depressing, depressing existence. So did she destroy all the witches so that Madoka didn't have to become a magical girl? No. Oh, wait, no, this is still the episode. I thought it was the end. I mean, it's the beginning, which is the end. Ah, we're back. Okay, and then what happened? Too much magic? So that it corrupts her instantaneously? Okay, so Qubey's like, Earth is just consuming resources now and not giving. We've reached that sort of like inflection point. Oh, man. Someone mentioned that we should definitely look closer at the lyrics of the songs, at least the OP and the ED in this series, which we will definitely do probably in the last video or something. But I loved that we went through most everything that happened in the first episode of this series, except with all of the knowledge, obviously, that we've gathered at this point, and also from Homura's perspective and what led her to basically go back in time over and over and over to stop Madoka from becoming a magical girl, which it seems like meant that she would, yes, destroy the Walpurgisnacht, but in the process of doing that, create an even bigger, I suppose, evil or destructive force by becoming the most powerful witch there ever was. So I loved that they set that up so well with the principle of balance that Kyouko first mentioned explicitly when she was like, look, if you make a wish, an equal amount of despair results from that wish. And so it kind of played out like that with Sayaka and then ultimately with Madoka, because she's so good and so selfless when she sacrifices herself to destroy the Walpurgisnacht, that then rebounds and creates an evil that is in equal quantity or like equal power as her goodness. It was also kind of incredible how they managed to stitch together all of those different ways and attempts and timelines that Homura has lived through. All of the different combinations of the magical girls, all of the different ways that they tried to fight, the ways that they fell into despair or died or sometimes killed each other, which was wild. They did so well to give us such a strong sense that absolutely every single possibility and pathway has been well traveled, which resulted in this sinking feeling that maybe it is just Madoka's fate to defeat the Walpurgisnacht and then become the biggest witch ever. I was also impressed with how they wrote into the story what was essentially a role reversal between Homura and Madoka. The Homura that we saw pre-becoming a magical girl was exactly like the Madoka that we kind of knew, had that exact feeling of uselessness to the point of thinking that she was better off dead. I wasn't sure if when we saw Homura just despairing at how useless she was, if the voice that sounded in her head was hers, or it kind of sounded like Qubey at some points, but then it wasn't exactly Qubey's normal voice. So I don't know if the point that was making was to say that ultimately Qubey's power lies in the pre-existing despair and feelings of worthlessness that already reside in someone. And then came the revelation that in that timeline, Madoka, the magical girl, saved Homura and inspired her to become, the cool and competent Homura that the audience started out with. It's funny to think that because Homura then set out to prevent Madoka from ever having to fight witches by destroying them all herself, that Madoka became stuck in her thinking that she is just a burden to everyone. The irony is that Homura knows the potential Madoka is capable of, but in order to fulfill Madoka's dying wish of never becoming a witch, she has to kind of keep Madoka dependent on other people to save her, especially if she's going to be entangled in this whole magical girl world. That was another subtle illustration of how, like, Schopenhauer's pendulum works. Madoka either remains her civilian self, always thinking that she's useless because she gets, entangled with her friends who do turn out to be magical girls without ever taking on the powers herself and therefore feeling useless. Or she becomes a magical girl and gains confidence, but pays by having to defeat the Walpurgisnacht and becoming a witch herself. Speaking of the Walpurgisnacht, I want to call Qubey out, man, on the bullshit that they spouted at Madoka back in episode 9, which I admit I was also pulled in by, because in this episode, it was revealed that the result of Madoka becoming a magical girl and then turning into a witch means that Madoka will end up destroying the world in like 10 days. So Qubey's whole moral case, right, about ultimately setting up this incubation system for the benefit of the human race was absolute donkey balls, because saving the human race and wanting Madoka to become a magical girl for the sake of that huge energy boost are mutually exclusive. Anyway, I'm so mad at Qubey, and I think I'm mad mostly because we knew that Qubey was a liar and a manipulator, and still I was willing to give them like a moment of maybe they're actually making sense. Look, I still think that their utilitarian logic holds. It's just that the reasons that they gave to Madoka were demonstrably false and manipulative. Thank you guys for another bout of Madoka, and I really look forward to seeing what insights that you guys have. We're getting to the pointy end now, so next video will just be episode 11, and then the video after that will be episode 12 and kind of like a final wrap up. So get your thoughts in. I read every single one, and take care, guys.